Hey y'all. So I received a couple of requests to do a deck tech video of the Viserai list that I've been taking to ProQuests. So here it is. And in this video, I will also cover my sideboard guide for the various matchups. As for my ProQuest results, at the time of this recording, I have attended 5 ProQuests and got a top 2 finish at 2 of them. In my first top 2 finish, I lost to a fantastic Prism player. To be honest, I had not practiced the Prism matchup very much. This was the first week of ProQuest when the meta was not as solidified as it is now, so I'd practiced a lot against Starvo, against the Mirror, and even against some Dash, but I was not expecting Prism to be as prevalent as it ended up being. So I lost that final for the most part because of a lack of familiarity with that matchup, whereas my opponent had practiced the matchup a lot and they played it better. In my other top 2 finish, I actually gave the concession to my opponent before decks were presented. The reason for this was that at this point, with all the ProQuests I've attended, I'm high enough on the 90-day XP leaderboard to be confident that I'd be getting an invite through XP. And so getting a win in that match didn't feel as much as gaining myself an invite, as much as it felt like I was denying my opponent an invite. Because for those of you who don't know, if someone is in the top 100 XP leaderboard by the cutoff date, but they have already won a ProQuest, the extra invite just disappears. It doesn't roll over to anyone else. So it was not a great situation to be in. It felt like if I win, only I get to be at the Pro Tour. But if I lose, we both get to be there. So yeah, so I made the concession, and it kind of made me feel like the 90-day XP should be the one that, you know, gives you an invite just to the specific Pro Tour. But if you win a ProQuest, it should give you a PTI that you can redeem for any Pro Tour. Because like, I'm not the only one who's been in this position. I know that there's been a lot of people in like Europe and in Asia and in Australia, New Zealand, where they get to the finals of the ProQuest and they don't feel like they're playing for the invite because they know there's no way they're making it out to New Jersey. So yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure what the best solution here would be. And to be honest, it's almost certain that any system they come up with would have its own flaws. So yeah, I have nothing much more to say on that. And without any further intro, let's get into the deck tech. So first thing I want to point out is that this list is primarily an aggro Viserai list. Aggro Viserai got a lot of great tools from Everfest, which we want to take advantage of. But of course, it must be noted that Starvo is very prevalent in this meta, so this list also has an OTK sideboard for that matchup. I've divided the deck here into the core section on the left side, which are the cards I always have in my deck, no matter the matchup. And on the right side, over here, I have my sideboard that is more or less split into what I call the aggro package up here and the OTK package down here. So let's start with the core, going over the equipment first. So, Arcanix Skullcap, nothing much to say here. It is the best headpiece we have access to. It blocks 3. Though note that since we are on the aggro plan and Viserai can output a scary amount of damage, go ahead and block with it early so you get your value, because it is very easy to have a big turn, gain the life lead and never lose it, and then realize, man, I never got my Skullcap value. Skeletor, absolutely crucial piece of equipment. Some might even argue it's busted. In the OTK plan, it obviously is the linchpin of the deck, enabling the big Sonata turn. And even in the aggro plan, combined with Vexing Quillhand, it is an absolute force, usually netting you about like 4 to 6 resources and enabling so many different lines of play. Rosetta Thorn, best Runeblade weapon, arguably best weapon in the game. Enough said there. So onto the core non-attacks, we have Become the Arknight, the Viserai specialization. In the OTK plan, this card is anything you want it to be. It helps you find your runechant generators early in the game, and it helps you find your Sonata later in the game. In the aggro plan, however, there's a very interesting cycle you go through regarding this card. When you first pick up the deck, you look at this card, and you think, I don't even know all the cards in my deck right now, so I'm just going to block with this or use it to pitch. Then you get a little better, and you start doing things like using it to grab pieces that you think you need to have an explosive turn, like you use it to grab a Modra Tide, and you play Modra Tide, and then you finish the rest of your turn with only 2 to 3 cards left because you had to discard a card to play this, and then you realize it probably wasn't very worth it, and you get even better, and you realize that the best use case for this card is usually just to pitch it for 3, or to arsenal it in case you draw a bad hand. What I'm getting at here is that actually using this card's effect is always net -1 card. So, and if you're on the aggro game plan, that is terrible, because usually whatever card you're going to get is rarely worth 2 cards. So the primary use case for this card in the aggro plan is to bail you out of the situations where you've drawn all non-attacks or all attacks. Next, blue Morven Skies. In the aggro game plan, this is what ensures you get to swing Rosetta with the, the classic cookie cutter turn of Morven Skies into an attack into Rosetta. In the OTK game plan, it sometimes gives you the extra source of go again that you might need on your big pop-off turn. Or even more likely, it is what will help you close out the game if you didn't manage to quite get there on the OTK turn, because, again, this is what helps you swing Rosetta, which is really crucial to close out the game. Modritide, in the aggro game plan, if you start your turn with this, things get pretty wild really quickly, especially if that turn involves popping Quill Hand, because then you get 3 rune chants from Quill Hand. In the OTK plan, be careful not to get too greedy with this card, because usually the best case with this card in the OTK plan is Modritide into Read the Runes, since typically you've used, the rest of your hand to block. But note, even in that situation, Modritide only gave you 2, like +2 rune chants. So if you need to block with it, definitely do so, because it blocks 3. And then you just play your Read the Runes without the Modritide behind it, which is still fine. I think the most common mistake I see with Viserai on the OTK plan is getting too attached to keeping the Modritide and not blocking with it, and they really should have. Runeblood Incantation. When I first saw this card, I was very skeptical about its place in the deck, and then I played with it and I realized it is amazing. In the OTK game plan, it is another rune chant generator, which means we can get to our OTK turn faster, which we really need to do nowadays because of Starvo. Like the timing that Starvo puts you on is a lot faster than, say, Oldhim. So anything that speeds up your rune chant generation you want. But even in the aggro game plan, it has the first surface level effect of reducing the cost of some of our attacks. But even more than that, it gives us arcane pings at the start of our turn. Because remember that in the aggro game plan, we aim to swing Rosetta at the end of every turn, meaning that we end each turn without any rune chants. So typically our first attack next turn is only physical damage. But with this in play, our first attack next turn still comes in with arcane, which is huge, because either they take the arcane and then now it enables all our cards like Rattlebones and Meet and Greet, or they pitch to block it, which means we take an extra card out of their hand, and it gives us information. Because say they pitch to block the 1 arcane, they're floating 2, and then you just come in with a big physical attack like a Runic Reclamation or something. So it's a really good card. It puts your opponent in a bit of a bind where they're they don't know whether you're coming with more arcane after this, so whether to pitch for the first 1 arcane ping or not. It's pretty big. Next, Sonata, a key combo piece for the OTK plan, and in the aggro plan it usually is draw 1, ping for 1 arcane with go again. Or, similar to Become the Arknight, it bails you out of your all non-attack hands. And in those situations, you probably also pitch into this. But then, because of Quill Hand and Skeletor, there actually is also the potential to have medium-sized Sonatas even in the aggro game plan. For example, if you start your turn with just 1 rune chant, say from an incantation trigger, you do a Modritide, a Morven Skies, and you pop Quill Hand, you're now at 6 rune chants, so you pop Skeletor and you play a Sonata revealing 6 cards, and all that off of starting with just 1 rune chant. It is really good. Oath of the Arknight. This is it's a blue non-attack that blocks for 3. That's basically it. Sometimes in the OTK plan you get to use it to play 1 rune chant if your opponent had a weak turn. And sometimes in the aggro plan you use it because your hand is bad. Other than that, it's a non-attack to help maintain our ratios for Sonata. It has good pitch and block. And I used to have 3 of these, but I cut 1 of them and cut 1 Whisper of the Oracle to make space for this next card, which is blue Lead the Charge. So I actually only added this card to my list after my loss to Prism in the finals, in the first week of ProQuest. This card basically lets you get around ALS, because they play the ALS, you use this, and then you have an extra action point even after you play your attack to pop the ALS. Otherwise, this lets you pop more than 1 aura a turn, which unfortunately sometimes you have to do. And note that even if your Amplify the Arknight or Rune Flash has the cost reduction effect, they will still trigger this lead the charge. So, if you play an Amplify for free because you have 3 rune chants, you still get the extra action point off of lead the charge. And also note that this also affects non-attack actions. So Rattlebones or even Sonata if you've pitched at least 2 into the Sonata. Which means what that lets you do is if you play Lead the Charge and then Rattlebones, you now have 2 action points. You can actually use Rosetta to swing at the ALS, and then your attack action card can go to the face. So that's another really great thing about Lead the Charge. In the aggro game plan, it's another source of go again. It's basically like extra Morven Skies in your deck, so you're not really complaining about that either. It's really only the OTK plan that this hurts because it only blocks 2. But it's a trade-off I was willing to make the Prism matchup better. Obviously, this is currently only in the main board because Prism is so prevalent right now, and if Prism wasn't so prevalent, I would probably switch them out. And then we have Rattlebones, which is just what a card. With the addition of Gloomveil, the power level of this card has gone up really high. Because with just a blue in hand and Gloomveil in your graveyard, you can pitch the blue to play Rattlebones, target Gloomveil, play Gloomveil, making a rune chant from Viserai so the Gloomveil gets go again, and then use your last floating to swing Rosetta, coming in for 1 rune chant, 2 arcane, and 2 physical. So that is a 2-card hand that represents 8 mixed damage from different sources. So it is amazing for both game plans. In the OTK plan, it helps you with the final bit of reach if you didn't quite get there on the OTK turn. And also it blocks 3, so you're not really sad to see that to block with this. In the aggro plan, it is worst case 8 damage off of 2 cards, which is amazing. But you also can do Quill Hand Skeletor shenanigans with this to pull out stronger attacks from a graveyard for free. Like, yeah, really good. There's only 2 copies in the main guard, but the 3rd copy is in the sideboard, and I do bring it in for most matchups. Now onto the core attacks. We have 2 red amplifies in the main board, the 3rd is in the sideboard, and we bring it in fairly often. But the reason we only have 2 of these in the main board is because I needed space for this next card, Ninth Blade. Like, I wanted to put more Ninth Blades in the main board, so I took out an amplify instead. At first, I only had 1 Ninth Blade in the sideboard. Then after testing, I realized that both game plans actually really want this card. First, in the OTK game plan against Starvo or Oldhim, you really need to outright kill them on the OTK turn, or at most leave them on 3, maybe 4 life. Because any higher than that, and you run the very real risk of getting fatigued out by them. Because of the access to Crown plus Rampart plus Null Rune 1, and also the fact that your deck at that point still probably has some defense reactions and some just Runechant generators, which can slow you down and affect your ability to close out the game. I found that to prevent yourself from getting into that situation, being able to play Ninth Blade on your pop-off turn is very huge. So that's why we want it for the OTK plan. And now on the aggro plan, it turns out that it has become really easy to cast a Ninth Blade. And you guessed it, that's because of Quill Hand plus Skeletor. And the nice thing is you don't actually need Ninth Blade in your hand for the Quill Hand Skeletor play. A lot of times I found that I block with a Ninth Blade first. Say it's just a vanilla block for 3, or if I'm against Prism, it pops a Phantasm, and now it's my graveyard. And then I can grab it back later on my Quill Hand Skeletor turn with Rattlebones. So, strong card. Next, we have 2 blue Vexing Malice. This is mostly just a blue attack, which we want a few of because of Sonata. Basically, having blue attacks in the deck means that we can get blues into our hand from Sonata to give us resources. Other than that, this is a very good card to help close out games later on, because most of your opponents will only be running at most AB1, so in a late game situation where neither of you are able to keep too many cards, and it becomes difficult for you to swing your Rosetta, because you only have like 2-card hand, this is the card that help you get that final point of arcane damage in to close out the game. Then we have Meet and Greets. We run 3 each of the reds and 3 of the blues. Both game plans really like this card. In the OTK game plan, this definitely has go again on your OTK turn, which is what you want from your attacks. And in the aggro game plan, it incentivizes your opponent to block all your arcane pings. And also block this, because this creates another Runechant on hit. And both of those things are what you want. And when you're playing aggro, you just want to force cards out of your opponent's hand. Then we have Spellblade Assault. Again, we run 3 each of the reds and 3 each of the blues. This card is amazing with Morbid Skies, because you play Mob Skies, and then you play this, and you create 3 rune chants on the back, which then sets you up for a lot of plays after your opponent already was incentivized to block the Spellblade Assault because of the Morbid Skies on-hit trigger. So, for example, you can do your Quill Hand Skeletor combo after you do the Mob Skies plus Assault, or even something as simple as just a Rune Flash, which will be free. So a very easy 4-card hand is you play Mob Skies, pitch a blue to play Spellblade Assault, and you play Rune Flash for free, and then use your last floating to swing Rosetta. It is a lot of mixed damage, and it's basically what lets you leak damage in, even if your opponent is trying to be defensive. And then, of course, you know, if you had a 5th card in there that was a Revel in Runeblood, then, you know, you've just done so much. Then we have Swarming Gloomveil. Okay, this card is just bonkers, because most of the time, it is just a free Rune Flash without the requirements of having 3 rune chants. For example, Moderate Tide into Gloomveil means that Gloomveil comes in for 4 with Go Again, which is exactly like Rune Flash. Or if you play Incantation into Gloomveil, Incantation is an aura itself, and then playing Gloomveil triggers Viserai, creating a rune chant. So again, the Gloomveil is just coming in for 4 with Go Again. Also, it's a really good Rattlebones target, as I mentioned earlier, and you're always happy to see this if you get it off Sonata. Just a really, really strong card. Next, we have Rune Flash. Honestly, at this point, Rune Flash is the mum, can I have Gloomveil? No, we have Gloomveil at home, and then Gloomveil at home is Rune Flash. That being said, it obviously still is a really good card that fits into both game plans. OTK always wants more Go Again, and so does aggro. Then we have Blue Shrill of Skullfront. This card for me is what replaced Dread Triptych, mostly because it fits into the aggro game plan better, with the whole Mob Skies plus attack plus swing Thorn Cookie Cutter turn off of 1 blue. That's possible with this attack, it's not possible with Dread Triptych. Also, when you use this after a Mob Skies, it comes in for 5, which is very overrated considering that this is a blue card. And also, it's a blue attack, so great to get it off of Sonata as well. Very big fan of this card, and to be honest, I would love to also run the red version, but unfortunately I could not think of what to cut for it. Okay, so that is the entire core of the deck, which comprises of 27 attack actions and 21 non-attack actions. And now onto the sideboard. So I've divided the sideboard here somewhat loosely into the aggro package up here and the OTK package down here. And there's some matchups where there is some overlap of cards, but most of the matchups sort of, you know, loosely fall into either category. And I'll go over this more in more detail during the sideboard guide section. So let's start with the cards up here, starting with the equipment. Honestly, the MVP of the aggro plan is Vexing Quill Hand right here. It's kind of funny that when this card was first spoiled, we all thought that, hey, it's a nice budget alternative for newer players, but now it's actually Grasp that is in the sideboard most of the time. As I mentioned many times, Quill Hand with Skeletor allows for some really explosive turns. It is not uncommon for you to be able to dish out 30 plus damage on a turn where you pop that, even if you did not start with that many rune chants. Another thing that Quill Hand does is bail you out of your awkward all red hands. So say your hand is red Mob Skies, a Rattlebones, and 2 other reds. You can start with the red Mob Skies, pop Quill Hand and Skeletor, and then now your Rattlebones is free, and that triggers Viserai as well. And then you can grab, say, a Runic Reclamation from your graveyard, which is also free because you got that 3rd rune chant from Viserai. And that, you know, Reclamation has Go Again from your Mob Skies. And then you pitch another red to Rosetta, and then you arsenal your last red card. That is definitely on the lower end of the bonkers things you can do with Quill Hand and Skeletor. But in situations where you absolutely need to maintain tempo, it gets you out of those awkward hands. Like, for example, against Prism, you like stumbling against Prism can be very deadly because then they just double aura you. And then, you know, after a double aura turn, you're like, okay, I stumbled once, let me try and get back into the game. You start with the Mob Skies and they just ALS you. And then now you're stuck facing these 2 auras. So stumbling into Prism, very risky. This is the sort of thing that lets you get out of your bad hands to avoid the stumble. And that's like the lower end of what this card does. In the best case situation, it basically just wins you the game, because if you do like 30 plus damage in the middle of all your aggro turns, it's huge. Next piece of equipment we have here is Creepers. Pretty straightforward. It gives you extra action points, and you potentially get to use it 2 to 3 times in a game, so very solid card. Also, it lets you cheat out Rosetta even on turns where you don't draw Morbid Skies. So for example, you play an attack, and then you flash out, say, your Runeblood Incantation, get your action point back, and then you swing Rosetta. Very good card for the aggro game plan. Onto the other cards, we have 1 red Morph Skies and 3 yellow Morph Skies. As mentioned earlier, Morph Skies are really what makes this deck roll. It gives your next attack go again, threatens an on-hit, which means you get your Rosetta swing, so you're almost certainly going to leak some damage. And in the aggro mirror, you give your attack a pretty relevant on-hit, so you incentivize your opponent to block, and that's what you want to do in the aggro mirror. Then we have Rebel in Runeblood, just another disgusting card we got from Everfest. This is another card that has made Ninth Blade so much easier to cast in the aggro game plan. For example, if you do your Moderate Tide into Gloomveil, into Revel, you now have 9 rune chants, and you can just already play Ninth Blade for free. And if you somehow manage to set it up so you pop Skeletor after playing Revel and then do a big Sonata or something, then you're basically doing a semi-OTK turn in the middle of your aggro game plan. It is just extremely strong and definitely a prime arsenal target as well, since our deck is already built around swinging Rosetta as often as possible, and this has the exact same requirement. This just fits right into our game plan and just gives us 5 extra damage. Next, we have Runic Reclamation. This card is surprisingly good in this meta. Against Prism, it pops Phantasm and has an on-hit that they really care about. Against Chain, if you get it early, you threaten their early Soul Shackles, and without the extra banish cards, usually easily outpace their damage. So it puts them in a very hard spot where they want to block, but it's 7, so it's hard to block. Maybe you force a Husker really early on because of this. And against Briar, if they get a CMH out, if they get a Channel Mount Heroic out, you force them to block on the Channel Mount Heroic turn, and that's just huge. Because either they block to save their CMH, and then now they have fewer cards to actually use the Channel Mount Heroic with, or they take it and they lose the Channel Mount Heroic, and yeah, that's what you want. In the mirror, this threatens their Runeblood Incantations, or any spare rune chants they might have lying around. So in general, this gives you a very good 2-card hand against other Runeblades, and against Prism, it is just good all around. Finally, we have our 3rd copy of Amplify and 3rd copy of Rattlebones, which we bring in almost all the time when we are on the aggro game plan. Now onto the OTK package. Starting with our equipment again. Grasp of the Arknight has 2 purposes. First, obviously, it's a runechant generator. And second, since you're on the OTK plan, it is likely you're against a Starvo or an Oldhim, so the block that this gives you is actually very relevant. And the boots. Sutcliffe Suede Hides is the true MVP of this package. And it may seem weird, since we have access to Creepers, but given the prevalence of Starvo, it is sometimes really hard to keep Sonata and also keep another non-attack in hand to be able to get an action point from Creepers. So with these boots, you can go off with only a Sonata if you need to, and still play a Ninth Blade and continue going off after that. So this helps us. This has definitely improved my Starvo matchup a lot, and do not sleep on this card. Onto the non-equipment cards, we have all 6 Read the Runes at 3 reds and 3 yellows. Just absolutely necessary cards for the OTK plan, obviously. A good target for Become the Arknight, good follow-up to Moderate Tide, and possibly the best thing about it is that it advances your game plan even if you're left with just a 1-card hand, which happens a lot against Starvo. Then we have the defense reactions. 3 reduced to Runechant, possibly the best defense reaction for this game plan. It blocks 4, gives you an extra Runechant, and even if your opponent has a Channel Lake Frigid out, you can still play this for free, which is huge. Even better when you're against Ice Lexi, because this lets you get rid of Frostbites on their turn. Then we only have 1 sync, and that is really only because I had to cut the other syncs to make way for unmovables. And now, obviously, these 3 red unmovables are only here because Starvo exists, but it is really what makes that matchup even potentially winnable. If you have unmovable in Arsenal, you can fully block out a Fused Oaken Old with just 1 3 block from hand and then 1 blue to play the unmovable. And similarly for Crippling Crush, you avoid the crush effect this exact same way, even if it had the Starvo activation behind it. Then what that means is that it frees up your equipment to block the follow-up Ice Hammer, which means you get to play your Read the Runes or become the Arknight on your turn and continue to advance your game plan, because the Frostbite can definitely mess you up. So yeah, that is the full list of 80 cards that I run, and I will briefly talk about an omission, which I'm sure some people will have questions about before I move on to the sideboard guide. And that omission is Garganian Tome. The first thing to note about this card is that it is a sideboard card. And it is a sideboard card because the OTK plan never runs it, because it doesn't block, and you don't want cards that don't block when you OTK. So it is a sideboard card for only the aggro strategy. So then the question becomes, what would you cut for it? And it is a good card, no doubt, but I couldn't find something that I would cut over it, because in the end, this card in Viserai is basically just one free runechant. Like, granted, it's one like free runechant in the sense that you don't lose a card to get that runechant, and that's obviously good. But still, it's not like it's in Briar where it's like literally half embodiment of lightning for free. It's one free runechant, and the cost of running it is actually kind of high. Because if you are in the Runeblade mirror, then getting this before they do potentially just loses you the game outright. Also, if you are in the aggro mirror and your opponent forces you to block, which any good aggro deck will be doing, like say Katsu or Viserai, or even just a casual CNC from anyone, then having this card in your hand basically makes it impossible for you to block properly, because you are unable to plan your next turn at all because you have no idea what this will draw you. So I personally find the cost of running this card to be too high for the relatively small benefit of one free runechant. With that, let's move on to the sideboard guide. Alright, so here is my sideboard guide, and this is literally the piece of paper that I printed out and put in my deck box for ProQuest, and I would highly recommend that you do this, because when you are at a long event, you really want to conserve as much brain power as you can. So just following what's written on your piece of paper for your sideboarding instead of trying to like figure it out before every match is a huge help. So I've got a list of exactly what's in my entire sideboard over here. So after a game, I can just take out the cards from the deck that are in this list. And just a little reminder up here to tell me what the ratio of non-attacks and attacks are in my main deck. Then I have these two lists, which are just the OTK package and the aggro package, because I found like there's a lot of matchups where it's just pretty straightforward what you have to do. And it's also unlikely they'll be seeing them. So I was like, I'm just going to dump them into either aggro package or OTK package. So that's like, for example, all these matchups over here, I just run the aggro package. So let's go over the various matchup sideboards, starting with Dash over here. We want to be aggressive into Dash, so we don't want any of our defense reactions. We bring in the Quill Hand, and we always want to have an even split of attacks and non-attacks. So to get up to 30 attacks, I bring in the 1 Red Amplify and 2 Runic Reclamations. Obviously, there's no good target for Runic Reclamations on hit into Dash, but like I said, it's there to just bring us to the 30 attack mark. Also, we bring in the 3 Yellow Morven Skies and 3 Revel in Runeblood to help with that aggression, but also note that we bring in the 3 red Read the Runes. And the reason for this is that it gives us something to do on the Dissolution Sphere turns. Either we tutor out the Read the Runes with Become the Arknight, or we just block out with the rest of a hand and then just play this as the only card left. Also, for each matchup, I put a little note from what I've learned from testing as a reminder. Note that you can't consult these notes once a game has started, but before the game starts, you can just look at it as like a little reminder of this is what the testing taught me. And what it taught me for Dash is to watch out for the Dissolution Spheres, and even on turns where one Dissolution Sphere expires, I should still block a little, because a good Dash player will chain Dissolution Spheres into one another. Like when one expires, and then it expires at the start of the turn, they start attacking you, and you are thinking, oh, the Dissolution Sphere is gone, I can come back with a big turn, and then they end all their boost attacks with another Dissolution Sphere, and then you're looking at a hand thinking, man, I really wish I blocked with this. So this is just there to remind me that I should block a little even on the turns where Dissolution Sphere expires, unless, it's the 3rd Dissolution Sphere. Next, we have all 3 Runeblades. Again, we want to be aggressive here, so we bring in the Quill Hand, And we want all 3 runic reclamations because, as I mentioned when talking about runic reclamation, it's good into all 3 rune blades. It's Soul Shackles for Chain, Chelmount Heroic for Briar, and Incantations for Viserai. So that brings us to our 30 attacks. And for our non-attacks, we bring in the 1 remaining Rattlebones, all the Morven Skies that we can fit in, and all the Revel and Runebloods. And then we have the 1 red Read the Runes that's mostly just to get us up to that 30 non-attack mark. And also sometimes you find that you are on the back foot in the Runeblade Mirror. Sometimes you just end up there, and Read the Runes is a nice card for you to just set up a little and find your pivot turn off of a big Sonata. The little tip here is to prefer going second except against Chain. In the Viserai Mirror and against Briar, you really just want to be the one to start with the tempo, so I prefer going second. Also, since we no longer run Grasp and we are running way fewer Read the Runes, there is less of an incentive to go first, except against Chain. And the only reason we do it against Chain, we want to go first against Chain, is because they have setup, like Flock of the Featherwalkers to get a Quicken token, or their Soul Shackles. So we go first against Chain just to deny them going first. Also against Chain, watch out for Invert Existence messing up your Rattlebones turns, and always try to force Husk on an awkward block. So typically you do this by coming in with a bunch of rune chants and a small physical attack. So, you know, if they're in like the 20 range, like 20 health range, you can like Revel and then attack with like your activated Rosetta Thorn. So that's coming in for like 7 arcane and 2 physical. So either they pitch to the arcane to save their Husk, or they take the arcane, they have to use Husk on Rosetta Thorn. Also a small note about the Invert Existence. You really typically only need to be afraid of it if it's already in their banish zone, because it's unlikely that they're going to use 2 cards from their hand to stop your Rattlebones, you know, if the invert isn't in their banish. So yeah, you can think about invert that way. But that being said, you shouldn't start your turn with Rattlebones against Chain, because in that situation, yeah, they will just use your 2 cards to completely fizzle your turn. It's much better to Rattlebones like in the middle of your turn somewhere. Now the Starvo, Old Bravo, and Oldhim matchup. So we have full-on OTK plan here, so we bring in the Suede Hides, and these are the only matchups where I actually remove something from the core deck. I remove 1 Amplify, that's just to make space for more defense reactions, and I didn't want to, you know, put this 1 red amp in my sideboard and just bring it in all the time, you know, in all the other matchups. So we remove the red amp, bring in the 7 defense reactions, and of course bring in all 6 Read the Runes. The tip for this one is to try and make sure you always have a defense reaction in your arsenal. And you only ever use that defense reaction for 2 reasons. To block something devastating, like an Oaken Old or a Crippling Crush, or because you have another defense reaction in your hand that you're immediately going to put into your arsenal. If you'd like to see this strategy in action, you can check out this gameplay video I have where I follow this principle against Starvo to pretty good effect. Wow, look at that self-promotion. Okay, and then we have these bunch of matchups where we just do the aggro package. That's Rhinar, Azalea, Kano, Levia, Bolton, Katsu. The tip here is that we're pretty favored into all of them because they can't really match our aggression. So just to go ham, and then, you know, there's a little note here, except maybe against Kano, because Aether Wildfire is a card, and we only have AB1, so, you know, they could honestly just, like, kill us from a very high life total. So, honestly, with a number of Starvos and Prisms, you kind of really just need to dodge that 1 Kano player at your event. Just dodge them, like, round 1, and then they probably got knocked down from the Prisms and Starvos, and then you can, you know, not worry about them at all. So let me just go over the aggro package. It's pretty straightforward. We bring in the Quill Hand, the attacks amplify in 2 runics. We don't need all runics for this. And then the Rattlebones, all the Morph Skies, all the Revels, and then 1 Read the Runes. That's just to bring us up to the 30 non-attack mark. And then we have the Prism sideboard. So this is the only matchup where I go over 30 attacks. I actually go to 31. Because into Prism, your 6+ attacks are actually also blocking cards. They're your best blocking cards. So we bring in the Amplify and all 3 runics. And then the rest of it is basically just the aggro package with the Quill Hand, the 3rd Rattlebones, all the Morven Skies, and the Revels. The tip for this one is that in the early game, you want to be getting rid of their auras as much as possible. Even if it's just the 0-cost blue ones, because those do accrue lots of value over time. And then in the late game, when they're low enough, you just need to try and go to the face. Also, I made this mistake in the finals where I lost to the Prism. Again, just showing my, at the time, lack of familiarity with the matchup, where I was playing too quickly and not giving my opponent the chance to respond to things like Modern. Like, I had a turn where I did Modern and immediately played my Morven Skies, and then my opponent gets to respond with the Arclight Sentinel to the Morven Skies instead of to the Modern, which is when they probably would have done it. And all that because I just gave them the extra information by playing too quickly. So yeah, play slowly into Prism. Then we have Lexi and Dorinthia. I have to say this part about Lexi has not been updated with the new Lightning Lexi list that's been going around. I haven't had the chance to test against it much yet. So when I wrote the guide here for Lexi, it was assuming Ice. And for Ice Lexi and Dorinthia, I just do the OTK package that's up here. This is different from the Starvo OTK package in that it doesn't run the unmovables, because unmovables into Ice Lexi is just such a bad time because you almost always have a frostbite on you and then it becomes really awkward to use it. So it just runs the other 4 defense reactions and it brings in all the Read the Runes, the Rattlebones, and the Red Amplify to get to the 28 attack, 28 non-attack split. The tip here is to block as exactly as you can with cards from your hand, and then use your defense reactions for their pumps. So because Lexi runs things like Rain Raises, and Dory runs, you know, a whole bunch of attack reactions, so you save your defense reactions for those if you can. And against Dorinthia, also make sure to watch out for Shatter if they are running Dawnblade. The new attack reaction, you know, just don't let it get your Skeletor, because yeah, that'll be pretty bad. And also against Lexi, note that you can use Reduce to Rune Chant to remove Frostbites on their turn. So something I really like to do if, you know, I want to actually play something on my turn is let their first arrow hit, get the additional Frostbites that it gives you, and then I block out the second arrow with, you know, a card or some equipment plus the Reduce to Rune Chant, and then that gets rid of all the Frostbites on their turn, and then I get to play my turn normally. So yeah, that is the entire deck tech video for Viserai that I have, including the sideboard and matchup guide. Let me know what you think of it, or if you have any questions or comments or suggestions how I can improve it. And yep, thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed it.